myself and Lauren are going to talk about...
Oh, it sounds so formal when you call me Lauren. I feel like I'm in trouble. What is that?
Yeah. Anyway, Loz, Lauren, endurance Lauren. But no, in all seriousness, we're going to be talking about something that we work on very closely with a lot of our clients. I know. Lauren and I work very closely in this realm. We do a lot of workshops around this in terms of the concept of building a healthy relationship with our clients. I think it's an issue that the world of nutrition, it's a big issue in the world of nutrition. I think obviously you can tell people how to eat. You can tell them what to eat, when to eat and all those kind of things. But a lot of people don't speak about the psychology behind eating patterns and people's relationship with foods. I think personally, throughout my life, I've kind of struggled with yo-yo dieting. I'll give you a bit of backstory. Like when I was in my 20s, like every other male, I think I wanted to be massive. So I did the whole Google and YouTube, and I looked at bodybuilding videos and was like eating excessive amounts of food and the bulking and stuff like that. So when I was like 20 to like 22, I went from 72 kilos to about 100 kilos of just excessive eating. So I thought that was going to make me big and muscular. Obviously there was just a horrendous amount of body fat that I put on. But I think what's important to note that it's not just about the concept of, of the food patterns or what I was eating. It was the body image issues. It was a constant pursuit of a particular body image that I idolized in my head, which was, obviously skewed by social media and all those kind of things, which then led me to constantly manipulate my personal intake. So it'd be like this pattern of, large amounts of food, lots of weightlifting, trying to get big. And then I would feel very poorly about myself in the mirror because obviously the fat tissue you put on, I was idolizing guys on steroids, so I wasn't getting the same results. And then that would lead me into a cycle of then going these incredibly restrictive diets and then yo-yoing. So I think that's what instead of blabbering on my whole life story, that was kind of one of the catalysts for me to kind of learn more about nutrition. And that's one of the catalysts in terms of one of the foundations or one of the principles we use at TFD in terms of someone's relationship with food. Like using my personal experience, you can speak about your own, but my personal experience is I can really empathize with my clients regarding this. And this is one of like the foundations of my practice. But I'll let you speak on that because we obviously speak about this all the time because we kind of try to, what's the word we're looking for? We try to, constantly grow as a team and as practitioners to be able to work in this realm with our clients. So like, tell me a bit about how you work with your clients in this realm.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, in terms of like sharing our stories, I feel like I'm pretty open about, talking about my past in terms of being in like elite level sport and developing an eating disorder. And, I look at it now and, I struggle to see the negatives, but during that period it was, I could easily say that it was the hardest period of my life. I was, doing figure skating. I was competing at the national level and judges were coming up to my coach saying, "What's wrong with Lauren? She's so unwell." I think I placed fourth at nationals one year purely because I wasn't strong enough and you need to place top 3 to go to worlds. And that was probably like a wake up call for me in terms of what I'm doing is not only damaging my health, but it's damaging my chances of representing my country in the sport that I like. So during that period of my life, it just all consuming, like every thought, every action that I made or had was revolving around food. And it's such a horrible place to live in when it's your own mind. And I think, like I said, during that period, it was so awful. But now, because of where I've come from and how much I've learned and how much I was able to flip that whole story, I struggle to see it as a negative because so many amazing things that I have in my life today are because of that chapter. I don't think I would have become a dietitian if I hadn't had that experience. And initially the passion to become a dietitian came from wanting to help people in that same instance. But I think I've also recognized other passion areas and those types of things. And I haven't necessarily become an eating disorder dietitian, which is maybe potentially where I thought I was going to go. But it still really helps us in our practice because obviously working with weight-based athletes, in terms of our combat athletes, I also work with a lot of our weightlifters and jockeys as well. And I think it does help in that side of practice. But again, even with our non-weight-based athletes, so I work with a lot of endurance athletes, and there's always this balance between wanting to perform at their best and wanting to be at their race weight or wanting to be lighter. Because it's like with fighting, right? There's like perceived advantage of if you're heavy, but then you cut a lot of weight and then you regain that weight, you've got the edge because you're going to be heavier than your competitor. And with endurance sport, I see that. But on the flip side, people think like if I can be light or if I'm around the same weight as like these top guys in this event, that they're going to be more competitive. So they're totally different sports, totally different concepts, but it's really important for us to understand this and to be able to work with our clients through this, because it doesn't matter what sport people are doing or if they're just trying to, you know, gain or lose weight. But I feel like these kind of underlying body image or perceptions of weight impact our clients and what they, you know, then ultimately impacts the way that they view food and the relationship they have with food. So I think a conversation that I've been having with a lot of my clients lately with regards to endurance athletes is they come to me and they say, I know I need to fuel my body because I am expecting a lot of it, but I'm too scared to gain weight. And that's one of the biggest trends that I've seen with my endurance athletes of late. And it is, you know, kind of not necessarily heartbreaking, but it's sad to hear because people feel like they can only do one thing. You know, they can either fuel and get fat or they can underfuel and lose weight, when in reality it doesn't need to be one of those extremes. And, you know, you do have people that have a healthy body weight or body composition goal and they also want to fuel. And you can obviously do both, but they are counteractive and we kind of need to do things, you know, in a balanced proportion. But yeah, I think there's this whole kind of perception, potentially because of social media, of like you said, right, you would look at people and compare yourself to these guys on the internet who were taking steroids. So it's obviously like not a realistic model for you to look up to. And I think same with like our everyday / age group of athletes. They look to professional athletes who don't have a full-time job, who train competitively and they train consistently. They've got people doing their diet, you know, providing them with all these types of foods, and people kind of look to those bodies or those aesthetics and set them as unrealistic goals. It's been a lot of talking today. So I think, yeah, no matter what sport it is, sport or no sport, you know, we see it a lot in practice. And I think, again, right, having had those negative experiences, I would never put my own trauma or my own experiences on other people, but it does help you to understand what these people are going through, because it's, you know, no matter what it is, you can always say like, oh, don't worry, or I hope you feel better. But unless you've actually experienced that yourself, you really don't know how hard that is. And I think, you know, people think like, oh, food, you know, yes, of course, it's something that makes me gain weight or lose weight. But I think the narrative is like food is so much more than just a means to achieve a body weight. And that's what I think, you know, as performance dietitians, especially in this sporting space, we are helping people to realize is that food is so much more than just, you know, a means to gain or lose weight. It's a way to connect with friends. It's a way to connect with your religion, to have good energy levels across the day, to like support your health. And I think shifting the focus away from only weight to all of the other amazing outcomes that food can provide us is something that really helped me on my journey to developing a healthier relationship with food, and something that I help my clients with in terms of helping to kind of steer away from the food equals weight gain and food equals experiences gained, you know, athletic performance gained, like happiness, energy levels, normal menstrual function gained. So I think as well, you know, the way that we speak to people that we work with, it's not all wait, but it's also like, wow, food can give us so much more than just a number on the scales.
For sure. And there's a concept I want to touch on. I think everyone knows about, you know, the term yo-yo dieting, but what I think is more prevalent, especially in like it's obviously very prevalent in athletes and weight-based sport, is this, but it's also very prevalent in I think for the general population, is something we call compensatory eating. Which what I mean by this is a lot of people have moments of binging, and it's not people with like eating disorders or disordered eating. I think everyone has these moments where they go out on the weekend, the classic, they kind of eat really well, and then on Friday and Saturday they have these large, you know, binge eating sessions where they're eating high calorie foods and a lot of them. And then what happens is they wake up with this sense of guilt and shame or regret, and then that day they'll either starve themselves, they'll fast, or they'll eat very little, and then they'll get stuck in this cycle. So it's not just like something that happens every day. It could happen just on the weekends, which is a lot, which is the general population, I think. But this is something that I want to touch on because we do work with people around this specifically, because compensatory eating kind of leads to this cycle, which is kind of like yo-yo dieting, but it's a cycle of shame and regret and embarrassment and kind of, like this kind of negative self-talk. So that what I work with a lot of people with is this really simple concept. If you're stuck in this, what I call a compensatory eating cycle, is that if you do have these binging moments, which we all do, it's okay. But the next day, wake up, accept that's happened, do not punish yourself for it, and move on like you normally do. Eat as normal. Don't put yourself in the past and punish yourself. Just simply move on in a positive direction. And that's the first step of changing the cycle. And when people do this, they will find that whatever their goals are, or, you know, if they just want to better their relationship or their psychology around food, this is one of the foundations. Because when I work with people who are like, I think a lot of people are stuck in this cycle. And what we speak about with them in terms of this compensatory way of eating, it happens in another realm as well, where they go, I'm going out on Friday night or Saturday night, so I'm going to starve myself. So they'll starve themselves, or they'll restrict their food intake that day, which then leads them to overeat or even excessively binge again at that time frame. So what I say to them, if you just eat your normal patterns, if you have breakfast, lunch, and then a snack, and then your dinner, you're less likely to binge and over exceed your caloric needs than if you starved yourself thinking that you're trying to get your calories low and doing that thing. So what I'm trying to say is that having consistency and acceptance and not this negative self-talk, and changing the way that you view your eating patterns and not having these kind of reactive, doing these reactive changes to your intake will really, really help you build that relationship with food. Then you'll understand your intake, you'll build that consistency. So whatever your goal is from there, you'll be able to very easily change. If you want to gain weight, you know what your level of intake is, the consistency, you just have to alter it. If you want to lose weight, alter it the other way. But that's what I'm saying. I think that, you know, the terms like yo-yo dieting spat around and relationship with food, but I think that compensatory eating is something that we're all guilty of. And I shouldn't even say guilty, because you shouldn't feel guilty about it, but that's something that happens with the athletic and non-athletic population. And it's something that if you change that, well, those small things that I mentioned, you'll have huge benefits in terms of your psychology, the way you feel, and just your overall performance and energy levels as well.
Definitely. And I'm glad that you said that, because I approach it the same with my clients as well. And people are almost shocked. And it's kind of crazy. Like, people say, oh, so if I have a binge, what should I do the next day? As if they're anticipating that it's going to happen, because they're so used to being stuck in this cycle, and it's like they're scared. And I understand it can be scary to maybe not feel in control of your eating. But yeah, I think the best thing that you can do is just accept that it happened. You're not in school. You don't need a slap on the wrist. You're not going to get a D- on your report card. Of course it happened, but you're an adult. You accept that it happened, you moved on, and you just follow a consistent diet as normal. And I think it's, yeah, like you said, it's a really good way to break the cycle and not continue to punish yourself.
And I think like one thing we see a lot in, like, it's not so much in like the athletic population. It's like just the general population comes to us to lose weight. I don't know if you find this too. Some people will have a really great weight loss journey through these principles and the stuff we kind of teach alongside providing the nutrition plan. But there's always a small percentage who stagnate, and they promise that they've been following the diet consistently. They haven't done anything. I don't know why it's not working. And you'll even, like, you know, early in my career, I was very reactive. I'll change the plan, I'll lower intake, something. I've got the maths wrong. But then after years of doing this, you realize what my first step is to further investigate. By, again, not saying that they've done something wrong, but simply ask them. I'm like, just for the next 3 or 4 days, track everything you put in your mouth. And then what you will find, tell me if you find this too, is that they will actually be overeating, like, subconsciously. Like, oh, well, I just grabbed a few almonds throughout the day, and then they've actually spent the day measuring it, and they've had 600 calories or 700 calories worth of almonds because they're mindlessly eating. And this is what leads to this other component of healthy relationship with food, is a mindfulness. I know everyone thinks it's not you doing a yoga lesson or you meditating for 10 hours. It's just you being present through your eating. And I think, you know, you can probably attest to this too, is that a lot of people mindlessly eat, or they don't know what they're putting in their mouth. And that's what's impeding their progress. Definitely,
yeah. And I think we live in a world with so many distractions. I mean, who just sits at a dinner table and focuses on their food? I could not tell you the last time I actually ate dinner without watching TV. I'm so 100%. Guilty of that, right?
Yeah.
But again, it's like we've got TVs, we've got phones. Obviously, if you're eating with people, that's a great distraction. That's not necessarily a distraction, right? But yeah, people just, you don't take the time to kind of think about what you're putting in your mouth, and then all of a sudden that meal's gone. You're like, whoa, did I even eat? So I think, yeah, bringing it back to mindful eating isn't having like a sound bowl and yoga meditation class while you're having your dinner.
You can have that if you want.
Yeah, if that's your style, like, go for it. That sounds really relaxing. But yeah, it's just like, this might sound lame, but it's like just thinking about like chewing your food And again, that's even one, right? Some people eat their food so fast, they don't even really chew or digest it. And they just like have no enjoyment from their foods. That's also something, you know, people that eat very quickly or just like shove things in their mouth as well. It's about bringing it back to that mindfulness, like chew things, like think about it, you know, minimize distractions. Some people can probably comfortably eat whilst watching the TV, but if you know that you're susceptible to overeating or not really being in tune with your hunger cues, you know, it's very important to kind of bring it back to that simple thing. But this might actually contradict what you're saying. And I feel like this is probably not necessarily for just general weight loss. This is more so for maybe the athletic people who are trying to drop weight, but they actually chronically undereat and don't drop weight. So I think that we should talk about that as well, because again, it's not all about losing weight, but there are athletes who have a goal that they would like to drop some weight. And that's fine. It's fine to have a weight loss goal. But so many of them, because they're doing it on their own, they come and they're like, I just, you know, this is what I'm eating in a day. And I look at it and I think, whoa, you are not eating enough. So then it's, you know, kind of brings in that whole area of low energy availability, and ultimately undereating, chronic undereating isn't going to damage your metabolism. I hate it when people say damaging your metabolism. But if you're someone that's incredibly athletic, maybe you're a fighter and you're trying to make weight, you feel like you're eating, you know, a mouse diet and you're not losing weight, it's important for people to also understand that sometimes undereating too much can actually be the reason you're not losing weight. And I kind of explain this with my endurance athletes specifically, and I say, you're expecting your body to put out a lot of energy. And at the end of the day, if you're consistently not putting enough energy in, your body has to decide, do I want to fuel my training session, or do I want to fuel putting down bone tissue, having a menstrual cycle, and just metabolizing my food? And ultimately, your body will choose the sport because it knows it doesn't have an option. So energy availability talks about the energy you've got left after exercise to fuel your basic metabolic function. And as a result, your body is very smart, likes to maintain homeostasis. And if you've chronically got food you're undereating, your body is very smart. It's going to downregulate, and you're not ultimately going to put out as much energy expenditure every day. And that's what can cause that weight plateau as well. And this is always due to that impaired kind of relationship with food, that I'm always needing to be eating less. So again, it kind of brings it back to how much of an impact, you know, your relationship with food can have on, yes, of course, your weight loss goals, but then also your performance goals as well, because you're trying to lose weight, you're chronically undereating, and then you end up stagnating anyway and jeopardizing your health and performance at the same time. So it's so complex, and it goes both ends of the spectrum.
There's like a second part to that as well, where you can fundamentally undereat for 5 days. I say it's a 7 day. We always look at like the caloric intake over 7 days, for example. You can chronically eat for 5 days, have really poor training sessions. You feel horrible. And you can see this too. Like you see someone's diet before they've worked with us and you're like, well, this doesn't make sense, because you're the deepest calorie deficit I've ever seen. And then what happens is back to this compensatory stuff. And what you were saying, the flip side of that is they have 5 days of complete, like, holy compliance. They're the best person at following this restriction. And then Friday night to Sunday, they are so hungry because they've deprived their body and they cannot control themselves, and they'll binge. And then if you look at their calories over the 7 days, they've put themselves back into maintenance. So there's the way you're describing, which is very common. And the flip side is that is what a lot of people say, I hardly eat. But yeah, you do, but the majority of the time. But if you average out your intake with those 3 days of binging, you've actually put your whole weekly calories into a maintenance, sometimes into a surplus. And that's why people are like, they're so confused by what's going on, because I'm starving myself, I'm training. Oh yeah, I do eat a bit extra on the weekend, but they're so detached from their intake and what they're actually doing, because they're stuck in this cycle, the shame and all those kind of things, that they're actually putting themselves in this position where they're, again, impeding their progress.
Definitely.
But I think an element that like we spoke about, I think one of the ethoses we kind of preach to our clients, which I think is another element to this, is that when you get a new client, the first week they start with your first check-in, they're very nervous and they want to get everything perfect. So I wanted like you to speak about what you think about this, because we've obviously had this conversation a multitude of times, the concept of progress over perfection.
Yep.
So I think like you were saying, like in your competitive world, especially as a female athlete, perfection is something that is highly sought after or seen as something that's important. What do you think about that concept?
Yeah, definitely. And I think when you get a new client that especially has never worked with a dietitian before, it's scary, you know, and I think a lot of people still have the prejudice that we're food police and that we're going to, you know, get angry at them if they've, not done something perfect. So maybe, I feel like we're both really friendly people. So I don't know if people like miscommunicate like my intention, that I think, oh, I need to be like perfect. But I think people probably feel pressured that we're going to judge them potentially, or like, oh no, I'm following this plan, I need to follow it perfectly. But with more of the athletes that I work with, I would say, if they've voiced maybe that they're a bit nervous or they're a bit apprehensive to start, I kind of say, let's just focus on your training nutrition first. Like, I don't expect you to go 0 to 100 and change your entire day of eating. Whatever we've kind of spoken about in the consult that I've recognized is like, okay, this is a key area. For example, I get maybe a new runner and they never eat before a run. Instead of like focusing on flipping their diet 180, I'll say, okay, cool. If you're just getting started, let's just focus on the pre-training nutrition, get that under control. And once you feel comfortable, then we can start changing your meals or like your meal frequency and timing. So that's probably one way that I would approach it in terms of not, expecting perfection. Some people are that type A from Monday.
Some people are great at doing that.
Yeah, from Monday, like I've already done my grocery shop, like I'm all set, and that's fantastic as well. But there are some people that will voice that they're a bit apprehensive or, they're not like quite prepared to do that full change. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, I would rather someone take 3 weeks to implement this plan, but it then last a lifetime, than to someone to just flip overnight, find it incredibly hard to follow and like a full change of plan and then not stick to it because it was too much of a change. Yeah. So I think, again, it's like just being consistent, chipping away, like changing things slowly and not expecting yourself to just change overnight, because you wouldn't expect someone else to change their habits overnight. So you need to be gentle with yourself and also appreciate that if you want this to last and you want this to be a lifelong change, you need to do it slowly and at your own pace.
Yeah, I think like we speak about the current culture is like this hustle culture, the David Goggins, stuff like that. And whilst I'm a very disciplined person, I believe discipline and consistency is so important for every aspect of life to succeed. And sometimes I can be very kind of short-sighted in the way that I view things. So I'm always challenging myself to look at things differently. But I think in this current climate of nutrition, it's like, especially with 75 hard and all these things that are so rigid, it's rigid, it's overly structured, there's no flexibility, and it sets this environment for a very small percentage of people to succeed, like those A-type personalities, the military guys. It works for them because they need that. But the vast population, it does not work, because you're setting people up to fail, or you're setting them up because these guidelines and the rigidity and the flexibility is not there. If they do not meet these perceived requirements or these societal pressures, they fall off and then they crumble and then they go back into this cycle of, I'm a failure, I couldn't even do this for 4 days, and do that kind of stuff. But the approach we're talking about is progress over perfection, is that instead of you falling off the bandwagon, because we all do, even in a dieting phase, I'll fall off, I might have a couple beers or something like that, which I shouldn't be doing if I'm in a very deep deficit, for example. But because I've got this, okay, it's progress over, I'm not going to be perfect. No one's perfect. Even those guys on Instagram, no one's perfect. What I'm saying is that you're setting yourself up for, a level of flexibility, the lack of rigidity, and you're going to be able to be like, okay, I stuffed up, dust myself off. I'm going to use this as fuel to make sure the next couple of weeks, my consistency is there, my discipline is there. But you're not shaming yourself or making yourself feel bad or anything like that. You're simply going, I've made a mistake, I'm human, and keep going. Because that's what I think fundamentally the problem with today's, fitness and nutrition world is the fact that everything is rigid, everything is like a hustle culture, there's no flexibility, it's unrealistic expectations. So people get stuck in this, success failure loop and the yo-yoing of life, instead of being like, okay, no one's perfect, all I need is consistency over time. So that's all you need. That's what I learned from training a lot and from nutrition, dietetics, and working with clients and fat loss phases. All the elements of my life and my job is like, at the end of the day, it's just about consistency, and that's not perfection. It's just doing something like 80% of the time really well over a long period of time, and you'll be successful. Like obviously with combat sport athletes, if we're in a camp where we don't have much time, we have to be 100% on plan.
For sure.
But a lot of my athletes who, we control their weight out of camp and stuff like that, and my general population people, I generally have an 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, follow the meal plan. 20% of the time, be flexible. Obviously make better choices than some other choices, but That's my 80-20 rule, and that has set up a lot of people, especially general population people, for success.
Definitely. And I think kind of touching on the 80-20 type thing, I think it's important, like in pretty much everyone's plan, I always put like some type of dessert in there because so many people, right? Like a lot of people like dessert, but I think a lot of people also think that they can't have it anymore. For example, if I'm getting a diet history from someone and they're like, oh, and then like after dinner, I have like a paddle pop, and they're so embarrassed about it. I'm like, a paddle pop's what, like 90 calories? At the end of the day, if you can't enjoy a 90 calorie paddle pop, you know, your diet is too severe. So I think like obviously we've got fight camp athletes that need to be very rigid. They understand that that comes at a cost in terms of like needing to be quite strict. But something that I found that helps people to kind of, you know, like feel less restricted is, say, for example, even if it's something like, you know, 2 squares of Lindt chocolate every night, you don't have to eat it every night, but it's in the plan so you can have it. And what the feedback has been and what I know happens in people's psychology is at the end of the day, we always want what we can't have. Yeah. So if I give someone a nutrition plan and there's no chocolate listed in there at all, they're like, whoa, I can't eat chocolate anymore.
Well, they're going to want us chocolate.
Oh my gosh, they're walking down the chocolate aisle and they're like, Lauren said I can't have it, Lauren said I can't have it. Like, and you know, they just like, they build up this obsession in their mind. Whereas, you know, in the plan, I'll always put, even if they don't like chocolate, whatever, I'm sure everyone likes chocolate. I always put like, you know, chocolate or maybe like one of those like high protein, like kind of pudding desserts or something, like whatever it is. Always a couple of dessert options. And the feedback is always, I don't crave chocolate as much anymore. Because that one, they know it's there. And two, if they want it, they can have it. And not kind of putting this thing on a pedestal that leads them to Friday, Saturday, Sunday, just wanting to absolutely go crazy on the chocolate because they can have it on a Wednesday night. So I think that that's something as well. And I just use chocolate as an example. But it might be like, you know, maybe they just really want a cookie. At the end of the day, what is one little cookie going to do if we can be really strict or like quite controlled for the rest of the day?
One's better than 6 we'll end up having.
That's exactly right. And one cookie on a Wednesday is so much better than 6 cookies on a Saturday. And I think if you allow yourself to have a cookie every now and then, you're going to be a lot less inclined to go for 6 because it's not out of reach. It's not out of bounds. Like, you know, you're allowed to have it. And if you know you're allowed to have it, it's less appealing.
100%. The last thing I want to touch on is one of the questions we get a lot, and you get this too, is how do I stop myself from blowing out of camp? The classic fighter, super restrictive, make weight, fight, and then blow out for weeks on end. And I don't want to give the usual Instagram response, which a lot of people say was like, oh, you got to make sure you're eating enough. And you know, it's not if you restrict yourself too much during camp, then, you know, this is what it leads to. Like, that's such ambiguous statements. And everyone, even the guys who are doing this and they're yo-yoing, they're blowing out and stuff, they know what they're doing. But what I would say to that is what I work on with my guys is we go back to that fundamental thing we spoke about. I usually give my guys a couple of days off. I say, have a couple of days off where you're not following a structure, kind of listen to your hunger cues, don't try to overeat, but kind of just be free. Have a muffin, do those kind of things. And generally that feedback is after the second day, they're like, man, I'm bloated. I feel like terrible. I want to get back to a structure. And I said, because I've given you that freedom, that's fine. And then when it's that, because after the few weeks afterwards, they're, you know, banged up, they want to have a little bit extra food. I said, just again, go back to 80-20, follow the plan, the plan in terms of the structure on a very, very flexible approach. Just at least hit your protein and fat targets just so we're having that consistency. Have your meal timings, and then you won't have this feeling of wanting to binge because you've had that, you're not playing with your hunger cue, you've got that consistency. And that's what it goes back again to the compensatory eating. The reason guys blow out is because they've been restrictive, they start binging, then they feel really guilty. So they start starving themselves, and then they binge, and then they starve. So the fundamental component in my eyes, you can speak on what you think too, but my thing is that the reason people blow up out of camp is because they don't understand or they haven't got a control of this compensatory eating. If you learn how to just not punish yourself, not overly restrict because you've had high calories a day before and have a consistency, and you work on this compensatory eating or stop the compensatory eating patterns, you will not blow out because you're honoring your hunger cues, you've got the consistency, and because you've got the consistency and your hunger cues are, you know, in a healthy range, you're not going to have these huge spikes and binge and kind of break into this cycle of getting fat loss camp, fighting and so forth. What do you think on this? Because you've seen this on your career too.
Yeah, for sure. And I think obviously it'll kind of depend if someone's like maybe got to fight in like 2 months. I always feel like they're obviously a bit more strict, right? Or even our jiu-jitsu guys who might actually have a tournament the next weekend.
Yeah.
Obviously, if that's you, and they're always very good, you know, I'll say whatever it is, go and celebrate with your team afterwards, have whatever dinner you like. But obviously that next day, like, let's just get back on our kind of maintenance plan. Obviously we would have come up with a plan probably before the fights even happened, just in terms of future planning. But in terms of I've got a fight and I don't have another one coming up, they're always the ones that are at higher risk of blowing up because they don't have that deadline that they're working towards. And I think, I always will kind of say, what are you planning on having afterwards? Like obviously like try and get them excited, because I know they've been on Instagram for weeks planning that post-fight meal. And I think a big part of it is, obviously allow them to not feel guilty, to have a relaxed meal, afterwards. A couple of days they're going to take off anyway. And like you've said, a lot of them come back and say, I've started, hey Lauren, like what should I do? I've started back on, like my fight camp plan because I was struggling to not have any structure. Yeah. And I think depending if, they've worked with us for a long time, they're just in that routine of kind of eating consistently, like having a meal, having snacks, kind of eating around their training. Good. Yeah, they used to feel good. They realised
the disparity between how they felt during camp with the plans that we provided them, and the outside, the disparity between how they feel like, well, I want to go back to feeling good.
Yeah, so I just pretty much, obviously the people that know that and do that consistently, they already know, but for the people that maybe not so much, I'll just always encourage them to try and get back to as much of a regular diet as possible, potentially what we would have started at the beginning of camp. I kind of put them back on fight week diet, but allowing that. Some people have incredible discipline, and like you've said, they will just kind of go back to eating quite consistently, but again, being more relaxed. If you're feeling extra hungry, that's fine. Like, let's go for like, an extra serve of rice at lunch. Like that's okay. You need to then get back in tune with your hunger cues and your intuition, because for the last 8 weeks, you've kind of been listening more to your mind than you have to kind of your gut in a way. So I think that's one big thing. And some fighters are like, oh yeah, I like to be really good kind of like while I'm training, but on my one rest day, and I know that I don't have to train. It's okay. Maybe that's the one day I'll have like my relaxed meal. And I was like, perfect, because they're dedicated to get back into it. And at the end of the day, if you've got good year-round nutrition, it makes your fight camp so much easier, and you're not going to have this consistent blow up and then drop weight and feel shredded and really good and then blow back up and then feel bad about yourself. So I think if you can prioritize your nutrition year-round, it doesn't mean being on a diet all year-round. It just means implementing principles that are realistic. And again, progress over perfection, because we don't need you to kind of just do a full 180 only for camp. Because if you are, you're probably cutting too much weight.
100%. I think we'll wrap that up, because obviously we can speak about this for days. I think a closing statement for me, which has worked for a lot of clients, because I think I know that this is an issue for not just females. A lot of people think this is a female-only issue, and I'm telling you, it's a very male issue as well. It's prevalent in both the genders. But what I've worked on with my clients, and which I encourage everyone to do, is remove the shame that you feel towards that and start opening your communication regarding this issue. Because especially my male athletes, I've removed the shame and I've opened these communication channels. And even recently, I could even share like an email from one of my professional boxers. And he's out of camp. He was that classic, he was big, and then he came down, and every camp was a fat loss camp. And now we have removed the shame and opened the communication levels. We have these great conversations. He tells me about his struggles. I reassure him. And I give him that, not just support, but accountability. And he knows that it's never going to be perfect, but we're working on it slowly. And it may never be perfect, but he has the support. We've removed the shame and we've opened communication channels. So I'd encourage everyone out there who's struggling with this to do the same with your dietitian, nutritionist, your coach, your partner, because once you remove the shame and open these channels, you will have a weight lifted off you, and then you've identified the issue, and then you can start working on doing small little things and progressing, not aiming for perfection, for these little changes that will be such a positive influence on all aspects of your life, not just in terms of your weight, like you said, your energy levels, your hormones, your happiness in general. So that's my closing statement in terms of what you need to do to help start your healthy relationship with food journey.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and it goes like having a poor relationship with health, whether it's a clinical eating disorder or just some disordered eating behaviors, that is regarding mental health. And, everyone talks about like you need to talk about your mental health, but we're not only talking about things like depression or anxiety. Having a struggle with food is impacting your mental health. And I think, I don't know, some people might feel embarrassed about it, but the best thing that you can do is actually open up and communicate that to people. And, you know, we are dietitians, we're not your therapists, but whenever someone has recognized these behaviors within themselves and feels confident enough to say to me, something that I need to work on is I find myself binging and restricting, or like, I know that I tell myself that I eat too much food. When people recognize it and they feel confident enough to speak up about it, then we can put the steps in place to help it and to overcome it. Whereas if people don't recognize or they don't bring it up, of course we can see it a mile away, but until that person knows it in themselves and recognizes it and is ready for help, I think that's when you know you can start building that relationship with food. And I know for myself, I was in denial for so long, but once I actually accepted that what I was doing was impacting my performance and I was open to improving it, it was a long journey. I reckon it probably took me until I was maybe 21, 22 to probably fully get over it. And even now I still have thoughts creep back in, because as an endurance athlete, I eat a crap ton of carbs, right? And there's always those little whispers in my head still that say, eating too much, you don't need to eat that extra muesli bar type thing. So I'm not saying that it's going to be something that you can fix overnight by talking about it, but it's definitely a step in the right direction in terms of recognizing what it is and how it's impacting you and taking the necessary steps that you can to overcome it. Because you'll feel like, if you're listening to this and you are experiencing issues, you will feel like you cannot get out of it, and you will feel like there is nothing that you can do to have a better relationship with food. But just know that it's not something that happens overnight. It's, again, progress, not perfection. You're not going to have an amazing relationship with food overnight, but the longer that you put off working on that relationship with food, the longer you're going to be in this state for. So yeah, I think communication is a big one. And if anyone's listening to this and has felt embarrassed before, you should not feel embarrassed to talk about that, because we're here to help you.
It. And from a male standpoint, real men talk about their emotions. So I can't speak for the female population, but I think that a huge limitation in especially combat sports is a very alpha male environment. I think that men need to start talking about their emotions more in general, but I think in the realm, which I can only speak for, nutrition, open communication channels and vulnerability is something that should be encouraged, because I think vulnerability is the true superpower and something that is the catalyst to change for most people. I think we'll leave it at that. We could talk about this all day. Thank you for coming to the Loz and Big Jackie show.